I received an anonymous USB drive labeled "Watch This Alone" and discovered footage of my wife and our parish priest sharing forbidden intimacy right inside the church. What I did during our dinner together made them both leave town forever. Watch till the end. Subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The strangest moment of my life happened on a Tuesday morning. Not during Sunday Mass where faith is tested, not on a stormy night when secrets are typically revealed in movies, but on an ordinary Tuesday. I remember the precise temperature, 67 degrees. The sprinklers on my front lawn had just shut off. Mrs. Collins across the street was retrieving her newspaper in her faded pink bathrobe. Everything was painfully normal. Then I opened a plain white envelope with no return address. I almost discarded it with the junk mail, assuming it was another credit card offer. But something, call it divine intervention or just pure luck, made me tear it open while standing at my kitchen counter. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in block letters. What happens in the confessional doesn't always stay there. Watch this alone. I stared at it for a long time, the way you might stare at a snake that's found its way into your home. My coffee went cold beside me. For some reason, I kept thinking about how Sarah, my wife of 12 years, had made that coffee before leaving for her weekly prayer group. She'd stirred in the exact amount of cream I liked, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't forget dinner with Father Michael this weekend." Father Michael, our parish priest for the last 3 years, the man who had helped us through Sarah's miscarriage, the spiritual guide who had reinvigorated our faith and brought Sarah back to the church after years of absence. I plugged in the USB drive. My name is Daniel Weber. I'm 38 years old, work as an architectural engineer, and until that Tuesday morning I believed I had a blessed life. Sarah and I met in college. She was studying education, I was in my second year of engineering. We married young, perhaps too young, but we'd built what I thought was a solid foundation. After the miscarriage 5 years ago, we'd struggled, but I believed we had emerged stronger. Sarah found comfort in the church, and I supported her, even if my own faith was more of a comfortable habit than a burning conviction. We were active in our parish community. St. Augustine's was a beautiful old church with stained glass windows that transformed sunlight into stories. Father Michael had arrived 3 years ago, breathing new life into the aging congregation. He was younger than most priests I'd known, perhaps in his early 40s, charismatic, well-read, and progressive in his thinking while remaining true to the core teachings. Everyone loved him, especially Sarah. I remember joking once that Sarah had a spiritual crush on Father Michael. She'd blushed and swatted my arm, calling me ridiculous, but she volunteered for every church function he organized. She attended his Bible study sessions and private spiritual counseling. I was grateful that she'd found something that brought her peace after our loss. Now, as the video on the USB drive began to play, I realized how blind I had been. The footage was grainy, clearly from a security camera with night vision. It showed the interior of the church sanctuary, dimly lit by candles. The timestamp in the corner read 11:43 p.m., just over 2 weeks ago. I recognized the place immediately. It was the small prayer room adjacent to the confessional. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a door opened and 2 figures entered the frame. Even in the poor quality footage, I immediately recognized my wife's silhouette. The other was Father Michael, his clerical collar visible as a small white rectangle at his neck. They weren't talking. There was no audio, but their body language needed no translation. Her arms went around his neck. His hands found her waist. What followed was so intimate, so passionate, that I felt physically ill watching it. But I couldn't look away. My wife and our priest moved to the small couch where parishioners sometimes sat while waiting for confession. The irony wasn't lost on me as they committed what I could only imagine was one of the gravest sins in their shared faith. I watched for exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds before shutting down my laptop. It was enough, more than enough. The room spun around me. The coffee cup I had been holding shattered on the kitchen floor. I barely noticed the hot liquid seeping into my socks. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Hope you're having a good morning, honey. Don't forget we have dinner with Father Michael on Saturday. Love you, Father Michael." The name that had once represented guidance and wisdom now felt like acid in my mind. I looked again at the note that had come with the USB drive. No clue about the sender. Was it someone from the church, a disgruntled employee? Another victim of Father Michael's charm? I had decisions to make. Confront Sarah, confront Father Michael, go to the church authorities. Pretend I never saw it. The last option wasn't really an option at all. Once seen, some things can never be unseen. Once known, some betrayals can never be unknown. I did something entirely unexpected instead. I texted Sarah back, looking forward to it. Love you too. Then I began to plan. The next 3 days passed in a strange fog. I went to work, designed buildings, attended meetings, and nodded at all the right moments. At home, I kissed my wife, ate the meals she prepared, and discussed mundane topics like weather and neighborhood gossip. I was a perfect automaton, going through the motions of my life while the real me seemed to hover somewhere above, watching this performance with detached curiosity. Sarah noticed nothing amiss, or if she did, she attributed it to work stress. She continued her normal routine, teaching fourth graders during the day, attending church functions several evenings a week. On Thursday, she had her regular spiritual counseling session with Father Michael. She came home glowing, as she always did. Father Michael says you should join us for these sessions, she told me over dinner. He thinks it would strengthen our marriage. I smiled and nodded, focusing intently on cutting my chicken into perfectly equal pieces. Maybe someday, I replied. He's such a blessing to our community, she continued. Did you know he's turned down offers from much larger parishes? He says he feels called to serve here with us. With you, I thought. He feels called to serve with you, Sarah. I wondered if she had any guilt at all. If the gold cross she wore around her neck, my anniversary gift to her last year, felt heavy against her skin. If she ever thought about the vows we had made, not just to each other but before her God. I wondered how she rationalized it. Was Father Michael different somehow? Did his position make their relationship less of a betrayal in her mind? Or was it more exciting precisely because it was forbidden? I realized I didn't really know the woman across the table from me. After 12 years of marriage, after sharing a home, a bed, dreams of children, and countless moments both joyful and painful, my wife was a stranger. The dinner with Father Michael was scheduled for Saturday evening at our home. Sarah spent all day preparing. She cleaned every surface until it gleamed, arranged fresh flowers, and prepared a complicated Mediterranean lamb dish that she knew was his favorite. She changed her outfit 3 times. I watched all of this with that same strange detachment, as if I were merely an observer in my own life. I opened a bottle of wine to breathe, an expensive Cabernet I had been saving for a special occasion. It seemed appropriate now for what I had planned. Father Michael arrived at precisely 7 p.m., bearing a bottle of wine and a warm smile. He embraced Sarah with perhaps a moment too much familiarity, then shook my hand firmly, meeting my eyes with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Daniel, it's good to see you. You've been missed at Sunday services lately. Work, I explained with an apologetic shrug. The Henderson project is approaching deadline. God understands that we must be diligent in all our labors, he said with a smile. Though I hope you'll find your way back to us soon, the community isn't the same without both Webbers present. I managed a smile in return. He was good, I had to give him that. Not a hint of discomfort or guilt in his manner. Either he was an exceptional actor or he had somehow reconciled his actions with his calling. I wasn't sure which possibility disturbed me more. Dinner proceeded pleasantly enough. Sarah served her perfect lamb. Father Michael praised it effusively. I poured the wine generously, especially for our guest. The conversation flowed from parish matters to current events to books we had recently read. To any observer, we would have appeared to be 3 friends enjoying an evening together. Only I knew the undercurrents beneath this placid surface. Only I noticed how Sarah's fingers lingered when passing the bread to Father Michael. Only I caught the meaningful glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. After the main course, as Sarah cleared the plates, I offered to serve dessert and coffee. In the kitchen, I retrieved the small envelope I had hidden earlier. When I returned, I carried a tray with coffee, 3 slices of Sarah's homemade tiramisu, and the envelope. Before dessert, I said, placing the tray on the table, I have something I'd like to share. Sarah looked puzzled. This wasn't part of our usual dinner ritual. Father Michael leaned forward with polite interest. I handed the envelope to Father Michael. I received this earlier this week. I think you should be the first to see it. He took it with a curious smile. A donation to the building fund. You know, you could have just put it in the collection plate, Daniel. It's not money, I said quietly. Please open it. He did, pulling out the note I had placed inside, the same note that had accompanied the USB drive, but I had added a single line at the bottom. I have the full video. I watched his face carefully. There was confusion, then shock as comprehension dawned, and finally fear. The transformation was subtle, a slight widening of the eyes, a barely perceptible paling of his complexion, but unmistakable. What is it? Sarah asked, reaching for the note. Father Michael pulled it away from her grasp with surprising quickness. Nothing important, he said, his voice remarkably steady despite the panic I could now see in his eyes. Just a private matter regarding church business. Sarah frowned, looking between us. What church business involves notes passed at dinner? Sarah, I said gently, turning to her. Do you have something you want to tell me about your relationship with Father Michael? The room went very still. I could hear the wall clock ticking, the dishwasher humming in the kitchen, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Sarah's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean, she whispered. I think you do, I replied, my voice still calm. I know about the late-night meetings in the prayer room. I know about what happens after your spiritual counseling sessions. Father Michael stood abruptly. I should go. Sit down, Father, I said with an authority that surprised even me. We haven't finished our conversation or our dessert. Remarkably, he obeyed, sinking back into his chair like a scolded child. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, I can explain, can you? I interrupted. Can you explain why my wife is having an affair with her priest? Can you explain how either of you reconciles this with your faith? I'm genuinely curious. Father Michael cleared his throat. Daniel, what happened, what you think happened, it's not as simple as… Stop, I said, raising a hand. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. I have video evidence. From the church security camera that you apparently didn't know about. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Who else has seen this? Father Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No one, I said, yet. The threat hung in the air between us. Sarah began to sob quietly. I'm so sorry, Daniel, I never meant to hurt you, it just happened. Things like this don't just happen, Sarah, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I remained. You made choices, both of you made choices. Father Michael stared at the table, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. You're right, he said finally. We've sinned, gravely, there's no excuse. There isn't, I agreed. But I'm still waiting to understand. How does a man who has taken vows of celibacy, who counsels couples on fidelity and morality, justify seducing a married woman? How does a wife betray her husband with the very person who is supposed to guide her spiritually? Sarah wiped her tears, looking miserable. It wasn't like that, we didn't mean for it to happen. After the counseling sessions, we started talking about deeper things. My miscarriage, my doubts about faith. He understood me in ways that… She trailed off, perhaps realizing how hurtful her words were. In ways that I didn't. I finished for her, she nodded miserably. And you, Father, I turned to the priest. What's your justification? He looked up, his eyes haunted. I have none, he said simply. I failed my vows, failed my calling, failed as your spiritual guide. I convinced myself it was something else, spiritual connection, emotional support, but that was just self-deception. His honesty surprised me. I had expected denials, rationalization, perhaps even an attempt to turn the situation against me somehow. How long? I asked. Sarah and Father Michael exchanged glances. 6 months, she admitted. 6 months, half a year of lies. Of Sarah coming home from prayer meetings and counseling sessions and slipping into bed beside me. Of Father Michael preaching about sin and redemption on Sundays, then committing those very sins days later. What do you want, Daniel? Father Michael asked quietly. Money, my resignation, I laughed without humor. You think this is blackmail, that I want something from you? Then what? Sarah asked, her voice small. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been planning for, thinking about constantly since I received that envelope. I'm going to eat my tiramisu, I said, pulling my dessert plate toward me, and then I'm going to leave. They stared at me in confusion. Leave? Sarah repeated. What do you mean? I mean I'm leaving this house, this marriage, this life we've built on what I now realize was a foundation of sand. I took a bite of the tiramisu. It was delicious, as Sarah's desserts always were. I've already packed what matters to me. I've rented an apartment, I've consulted a lawyer. Daniel, please, Sarah begged, reaching for my hand. We can work through this, we can get counseling. With who? I asked pointedly, glancing at Father Michael. Another priest who might decide my wife is his for the taking. Father Michael flinched. I turned back to Sarah. You know what hurts the most, not that you cheated, though that's painful enough. It's that you cheated with someone I trusted. Someone we both had put on a pedestal. You took the most traumatic experience of our lives, losing our baby, and used it as a pathway to betrayal. Sarah was sobbing openly now. Father Michael looked physically ill. As for you, I said, addressing him, I won't be going to the DOCs or sharing that video. Your conscience and your God can be your judges. Relief washed over his face, quickly followed by shame at feeling such relief. But, I continued, I would suggest you consider a new calling, or at least a new parish, because while I won't actively expose you, I also won't lie if asked directly, and secrets have a way of surfacing in communities like ours. I finished my dessert, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and stood. The divorce papers will be delivered next week. I'm not interested in fighting over possessions. Take the house, Sarah. Take everything except my personal belongings, which I've already removed. I just want to be free of this. Daniel, please, Sarah stood, reaching for me. 12 years, we can't end like this. I stepped back from her touch. We already did, 6 months ago when you decided our vows meant nothing. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. You know what's ironic? I've been struggling with my faith for years, going through the motions but not feeling it the way you do, yet now I find myself praying more than ever, not for reconciliation or even understanding, just for peace. I hope you both find it too. With that, I walked out of my home, leaving behind my wife, her lover, and the life I had thought was mine. The aftermath was both better and worse than I had anticipated. Better because leaving gave me a clarity I hadn't expected. Worse because no matter how prepared you think you are for the end of a marriage, the reality is always more painful. Sarah called incessantly for the first week. I didn't answer. She left tearful voicemails, sent desperate texts, even emailed long explanations and apologies. I read and listened to them all but responded to none. Father Michael attempted to contact me once, a carefully worded email expressing his deepest remorse and offering to help with any spiritual healing I might need. The audacity almost made me laugh. I deleted it without reply. Word spread quickly in our close-knit community, despite my discretion. Perhaps Sarah confided in a friend. Perhaps Father Michael felt compelled to confess to someone in the church hierarchy. Whatever the source, within 2 weeks of my departure, the whispers began. I received awkward condolence calls from church members. Some took Sarah's side, suggesting that if I had been more attentive, more spiritual, more present, she wouldn't have strayed. Others expressed shock and support for me. Most simply didn't know what to say or whose version of events to believe. Father Michael announced his resignation 3 weeks after our dinner. He cited personal reasons and a need for spiritual renewal. He requested a transfer to a monastery for a period of reflection. The parish bulletin made no mention of moral failings or inappropriate relationships, but the timing spoke volumes to those paying attention. Sarah moved out of our house a month later. She couldn't afford the mortgage on her teacher's salary alone, and perhaps the memories were too painful. I heard through mutual friends that she had taken an apartment across town and requested a transfer to another school district. The video that had started it all remained on my laptop, unwatched after that first viewing. Sometimes I thought about deleting it, wiping away the tangible evidence of their betrayal. But something stopped me each time, not a desire for leverage or revenge, but perhaps a need for certainty. On my darkest days, when I wondered if I had overreacted or misunderstood, the file sat there, an unwelcome reminder that I hadn't imagined any of it. I never did discover who had sent me the USB drive. My best guess was the elderly church custodian, Mr. Peterson, who had always seemed to notice everything while saying very little. He had looked at me with sad, knowing eyes the last time I had visited the church to collect some books I had left in the parish library. But he never approached me, and I never asked. 6 months after leaving, the same amount of time their affair had lasted before I discovered it, I received a letter from Sarah. Unlike her previous communications, this one was calm, reflective, almost resigned. She wrote that she had begun genuine therapy, not spiritual counseling, and was confronting hard truths about herself. She acknowledged that she had used my perceived emotional distance after the miscarriage as an excuse for her behavior. She admitted that the forbidden nature of her relationship with Father Michael had been part of its appeal, a way to feel special, chosen, important in ways that a normal marriage couldn't provide. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she wrote, "or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I understand better now how completely I betrayed not just our vows, but your trust in the life we had built. I will regret that until my dying day." She closed by saying she had heard I was doing well in my new position. I had accepted a job offer in a city 3 hours away, and that she was genuinely happy for me. I sat with that letter for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of letting go. I wrote back a short note acknowledging her letter and wishing her well in her journey. It was the first direct communication we had shared since I walked out that Saturday night. As for Father Michael, I heard he eventually left the priesthood altogether. Someone told me he had moved to another state and was teaching theology at a small college. I felt no satisfaction in this news, only a vague sense that perhaps justice of some kind had been served. My own spiritual journey took unexpected turns. I stopped attending church for nearly a year, unable to separate the institution from the hypocrisy I had witnessed. But gradually, I found myself drawn back to faith, though in a different form. I began attending services at a small, unassuming congregation where the pastor was an older man with kind eyes and no pretensions of moral superiority. "We're all broken vessels," he told me when I finally shared my story with him. "Some more visibly than others. The miracle isn't that God uses perfect people, there aren't any, but that God's light can shine through our cracks." I found comfort in that image, not enough to erase the past, but enough to imagine a future. 2 years after that fateful Tuesday morning when I opened an anonymous envelope, I finally deleted the video file. I didn't need it anymore, not as evidence, not as a reminder, not as anything. The past was the past, and while it had shaped me, it no longer defined me. That same week, I met a woman named Claire at a community center where I volunteered teaching architectural concepts to at-risk youth. She was a counselor there, practical and warm, with no airs of spiritual superiority. When she learned I was divorced, she nodded matter-of-factly and said, "Me too. Life rarely goes as planned, does it?" I found myself telling her the whole story over coffee one afternoon. Not to warn her about my baggage or test her reaction, but simply because it felt right to be honest. She listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and when I finished, reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said. 6 months later, that time frame again, appearing like a narrative echo in my life, we were dating seriously. I noticed with some amusement that we rarely discussed religion, though we both had faith of different kinds. Hers was quiet and personal, exhibited more in how she treated others than in any outward displays or institutional affiliations. Sometimes I think about Sarah and wonder if she found peace. I hope she did. Not because I have fully forgiven her. I'm not sure complete forgiveness is always possible or even necessary, but because holding on to bitterness serves no one. As for Father Michael, I think about him less often. His betrayal, while profound, feels more distant somehow, perhaps because his vows to me were implicit rather than explicit. Perhaps because the deepest cuts always come from those closest to our hearts. I received a wedding invitation from a former church friend last month. The ceremony will be held at St. Augustine's. A new priest has taken over, and by all accounts, he's a humble, straightforward man focused more on community service than charismatic sermons. I haven't decided yet if I'll attend. Claire says the decision is entirely mine to make. "The past doesn't disappear just because we want it to," she told me. "But we get to choose how much power it has over our present." She's right, of course. The anonymous envelope that arrived on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday changed the trajectory of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. It brought pain, certainly, disillusionment, loss, but it also brought clarity, freedom, eventually even growth. I still have the note that came with the USB drive. I keep it in a small box along with other reminders of significant moments in my life, both positive and painful. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, when I'm packing for a move or reorganizing my belongings, I'll come across it and remember. What happens in the confessional doesn't always stay there. The irony is that confession, real confession, not the kind that happened in that prayer room, can be healing. Acknowledging truth, however painful, creates space for something new to emerge. I don't know who sent me that envelope. I don't know if they intended to destroy my marriage or save me from further deception. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. But I am grateful in a complicated way for that unknown messenger who forced me to see what I had been blind to. Some might call it cruel to expose such a secret. Others might call it a mercy. I've come to believe it was simply necessary, a hard truth that needed to light. 3 years after that Tuesday morning, I still sometimes wake up thinking about how ordinary that day began. How the sprinklers were running. How Mrs. Collins was getting her newspaper. How Sarah had made my coffee just the way I liked it. How some revelations come not with thunder and lightning, but with the quiet tearing of an envelope on an otherwise unremarkable day. And how life continues afterward, different but not ended, wounded but not destroyed, changed but somehow still whole. That perhaps is the real confession, not what happened in that prayer room, but what happens in the human heart, its capacity for betrayal, yes, but also for resilience, for rebuilding, for finding against all odds a way forward, even on perfectly ordinary Tuesdays.